I'm Bill Schneider. I'm here at Third Way, which is a moderate think tank in Washington. Most of the people here are associated with the Democratic Party and worked, I did not, but most people here, many people here, worked in the Clinton administration. I have been a political analyst for really all of my career. I've done it as a university teacher at various universities in the United States. I have been a print and broadcast journalist. I worked at CNN for 20 years. And at the moment, I'm a contributor to Al Jazeera English television network. If I had the answer to that, I'd probably have a Nobel Prize. President Obama has a Nobel Prize, but he doesn't have the solutions yet. It's very difficult to come up with the solutions. There's bigotry and radicalism in every country. Even in the United States, we see it from time to time. It's a problem for any country in the world. I would say that there's always some hope. The Arab Spring, in many ways, was a sign of hopefulness because populations in several countries, Egypt, Tunisia, Syria now, tragically, they've tried to overthrow dictators in their countries. The whiff of democracy is in the air. That doesn't mean all these movements are pure and high-minded, but they are in the direction of democracy. So that when we see bigotry and oppression, eventually we always see a reaction against it. And that's what we're seeing in much of the Middle East right now. Turkey is a model in the Middle East. It's not an Arab country, but it's a Muslim country. And Turkey creates a sense around the world that it is possible for a Muslim country to be a democracy. A lot of Americans wonder. They think Islam and radicalism are somehow linked. President Bush made a great effort, even immediately after 9/11, to praise the Muslim religion and to argue that Islam and radicalism are very separate things. So I think Turkey is a very important and a model to be encouraged and cherished by the world because it proves that there is such a thing as Islamic democracy. A unity of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism would be an amazing thing. We've been trying it now for about 2,000 years. It has never really come to pass. But at the moment, there's still a lot of ill will, and even among Christians, Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland have been fighting for hundreds of years. But religion is the source of great advances in civilization as well as setbacks. It can be a source of tolerance, of compassion, but it can also be a source of bigotry and oppression. Religion, in many ways, is sometimes good, sometimes bad, but generally it's been a force, I think, for good in the world, including Islam, which has been one of the world's great religions. Yes, that is the solution, and it's been a solution that's been hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, in coming. Christianity was not the world's most enlightened religion. They had the Inquisition, they had oppression of minorities, there was a lot of violence, they had oppression of Jews in the history of Christianity, and of course divisions. Islam had a conquering past. Jews have never had that. They were destroyed as a country 2,000 years ago. But today there's, of course, resentment of the Jewish state and its policy towards Palestinians. So every religion has blemishes on its past. Every single religion, even Hinduism and Buddhism. So it's something that has to be overcome. Slowly, I think the world is making progress, principally because of education. The answer to bigotry and intolerance is education. In many cases, traditional religions are not very welcoming of modern education, but education is, I think, the answer. That would be wonderful. The problem is there are issues. Israel is an issue. It's a real issue. It's a conflict of interest between Israelis and Palestinians. It's not a misunderstanding. Conflict of issues of interest have to be worked out through a peace process, which unfortunately at the moment is not really going anywhere. There have been historic conflicts between Christians and Christians, between Jews and Christians over a great many issues, some of them religious, some of them not religious. I don't think the Nazi oppression of the Jews was driven principally by religion. It was racial in its origin. These kinds of conflicts are part of society. They have to be overcome. Sometimes the only way to do it is with violence. The Nazis had to be defeated because of their oppressive bigotry. That's a very difficult problem because there are repercussions in Syria. Iran and Russia both have interests in Syria and have supported the oppressive Syrian government. Israel is a close neighbor of Syria and looks with concern. Lebanon, of course, has a lot of interest in what's happening in Syria, and it appears that al-Qaeda has taken an interest in the conflict there. It is difficult to see exactly what the United States can do without making the situation worse or creating a bigger conflict and in the Middle East. That's why the United States is being very cautious not to do anything damaging. Meanwhile, the world sits by and watches hundreds of people being killed every single day, and it is painful to witness. It is painful to witness, and the United States feels very self-conscious about really not being able to do more about it. But I haven't noticed that the rest of the world has stepped forward, including the Arab world, either. Turkey has had, in the past, good relations with Israel. They've sometimes been disrupted over the issue of the flotilla and other conflicts. Those conflicts of interest always arise between countries. You can hardly find two countries on earth that haven't had conflicts of interest, and they simply have to be accepted and worked out. In terms of a model, the description of Turkey as a moderate Islamic country that wants to promote the ideals of peace and justice, what we are waiting for is for the Iranians to say what you just said, that nuclear weapons are not acceptable under the Quran, that nuclear war with the killing of millions of innocent people is totally incompatible with Islam. We are waiting for the Iranians to say that. The Turks will say that. Many moderate Islamic regimes will say that, but the Iranians have not said that. Religious leaders vary in the amount of authority they have. In Iran, they have a great deal of authority. In Israel, limited authority. In the United States, even more limited authority. In Turkey, disputed authority. There are a lot of people who don't like the idea of a religious government in Turkey. So while religious leaders being outspoken would be something most welcome for the cause of peace and justice and mutual understanding, it's not entirely clear how much real political power they have. It took about more than 1,000 years, about 1,600 years for laicism to take root in Europe. You had constant wars between Christian nations, and laicism was not accepted really until the Enlightenment, which is well into the 18th century. It's a very difficult thing to accomplish. But the political realities are there are serious divisions of real interests between countries in the world, between Iran and Saudi Arabia. They're both Muslim, but they are deeply resentful of each other, and they would probably like to destroy each other, yes. Just as Germany and France tried to do in the Christian world for many years. But I would say that there is progress. I would say there is more understanding than there used to be, principally because of modern education and modern media. People know each other, know about each other. Sometimes you get peace through understanding, although I imagine if the world had understood Stalin or Hitler better, they would have gone to war earlier because their views were deeply threatening to the peace and stability of the world. There are always going to be conflicts of interest. They are unavoidable. Religion can contribute to the resolution of those conflicts, but religion can also contribute to conflict, and it has done both in history. I believe that those in power have to have a good understanding of interests, what people's interests are, and how those interests, which are often conflicting, can be reconciled. And that's a rational process. Yes, social justice is correct, but it is an ideal. In the reality, you have real conflicts of interest, and we try to work them out, usually without war. Sometimes the wars are necessary. I don't think the issues involving Europe or Japan could have been resolved without war in the 1940s. So sometimes wars do settle problems. You can't assume that they'll just go away. I'm a political scientist. I believe that interests are real, and those interests do often come into conflict, and sometimes religion makes it worse. Sometimes religion can contribute to better understanding and more tolerance, but frankly, the history of religion often involves less understanding and less tolerance, particularly among religious radicals. Well, I think it's happening in places in the world. I mean, I think Turkey is in many ways a model of a government that is a religious government but isn't radical or extreme. And there is some tensions in Turkey, of course, between the religious and the secular. but it's an example of how a religious government can govern with tolerance and compassion. And it even has had in the past a reasonably good relationship with the Jewish state, with Israel. So in many ways, these models emerge. The United States is a model of many different religions. We could end up with a Mormon president. We've never had that. We have an African-American president, despite our history of racism in this country. So that the United States is also a model to much of the world of how conflicts of interests can be resolved. But on the whole, the larger march is towards greater progress and greater understanding. Yes, I enjoyed my visits to Istanbul in the past. They were quite nice. I spoke at universities. I did television interviews. I have many friends there. I remember a lovely picnic on the shores of the Bosporus. There were fireworks going off. I remember it was the 4th of July, and I thought, my goodness, why are they celebrating the 4th of July in Turkey? Someone explained that fireworks are often used to celebrate weddings in Turkey. But it was a wonderful experience, and it is one of the world's great impressive countries. I mean, the economy and the degree of social understanding in Turkey is very impressive, and it is, in many ways, a model for the world.